We're just 9 days out from the 2024 New York City Marathon, which is crazy. So wanted to hop on here for a quick course strategy. Those of you who know me know I could talk about this for hours, so going to do my best to keep this fairly short. Okay, so lots of people are pretty overwhelmed about the course because you are going through all 5 boroughs of New York City. So starting in Staten Island on the Verrazano Bridge, heading into Brooklyn, going over the Pulaski Bridge into Queens, across the Queensboro Bridge into Manhattan, up into the Bronx, back into Manhattan, and finishing in Central Park. So we'll break it down mile by mile. But just high level, given the fact that you are going over 5 bridges, you are of course going to get quite a bit of elevation gain. In total, the course has about 850 feet of elevation gain over the course of the 26.2 miles. And you can see that here on a summary level. I'll call out when we do mile by mile where the major hills are, but as you can tell, the biggest elevation of the whole entire race is right at the start at the Verrazano Bridge, and then you have rolling hills throughout the rest of the race. Okay, so starting off on the Verrazano Bridge, mile 1 is almost entirely uphill. However, since it's at the start of the race, you're hearing New York, New York playing in the background. Everyone is so hyped, your legs are fresh. You're not gonna really notice too much of an uphill. It is crazy though, if you look to the side, you can see like it's literally like that, but you don't feel it because you're like so hyped up. And then mile 2 is pretty much a straight downhill. When I ran the New York Marathon in 2021, it was my first marathon and I actually PR'd my 1 mile time on mile 2 of a marathon. Do not recommend, but you will probably start going pretty fast at that mile 2 just because of gravity taking you downhill. Okay, so once you make it off the Verrazano Bridge, you will be in Brooklyn basically from the end of mile 2 all the way up basically through the halfway point. So you're in Brooklyn for a good 11 miles. High level for Brooklyn, it's a lot of really small rolling hills, nothing too crazy. So Brooklyn is definitely a good place to kind of just lock into your pace and start clicking through the miles. The first parts of the Brooklyn stretch will be in the neighborhoods of Bay Ridge and Sunset Park, and these are nice local neighborhoods, and last year they had really great fans there. And for most of this stretch, you will be on 4th Avenue. Depending on your color, you might be taking slightly different variations of this, but pretty much the same idea. And then when you make it to mile 8, that's when things start to get a little bit noisy. So at mile 8, all the different colors merge into one and everyone is on the exact same course and in the same lanes. Like prior to that, it's slightly different variations. You might be on one side of the street versus the other depending on your color. But at mile 8, everyone comes together. It starts to get really loud because you are now in like the Park Slope area of Brooklyn. You're near the Barclays Center. You're approaching downtown Brooklyn. And there's just a ton of fans out there. It's also at mile 8 that you start to approach your first sizable hill, but nothing to get too worried about, just something to be aware of. So here we were last year around that area, and then you head into Clinton Hill, which is a very quaint part of the course, super great energy there as well. And then shortly after, you'll start to head into Williamsburg, but you'll go through South Williamsburg first, which is a Hasidic Jewish neighborhood, and they will all be out there. Technically, it's a working day for them, so they'll be trying to cross the street. So something to keep in mind that they may be crossing, and it will also be a little bit more quiet right around mile 11, which honestly is probably good to give your senses a little bit of a rest, because once you make it into North Williamsburg on Bedford Avenue, the crowds are deafening. Like, it is crazy. Like, especially last year, I just remember being like, this is unreal. This is not real life. So that's like around mile 12. And then mile 13, you'll head into Greenpoint before crossing over the Pulaski Bridge. So that bridge is right around halfway point. I believe it's about half a mile long, maybe a little bit less, slight incline. And this might be the point in the course where you start to feel a little bit tired just because you're halfway done and going uphill. So just something to be aware of here. And then from there, you'll head into Queens. I believe you're in Queens for about 1.5 miles or so, so not too long in Queens. And actually, the crowds in Queens last year were really great as well, so something to look forward to there, especially as you approach the Queensboro Bridge. The Queensboro Bridge is probably the most infamous part of the New York City Marathon course. Primary reason being it's hitting right around mile 15 or so in the race, and it is a pretty steep uphill. The bridge is also fairly long. It's about 1.5 miles long, and it is entirely silent. There are no fans on the Queensboro Bridge, so because of this, this bridge gets a bad rap. My hot take is that it's really not that bad, especially if you've practiced it before. It is a sizable uphill, but with any uphill, you're gonna get a nice downhill. And once you take that nice downhill, you're now into Manhattan on what they call Thunder Alley. And so that is one of the loudest parts of the course right as you're exiting onto 1st Avenue, which is a really fun stretch of the race. So you're on 1st Avenue from around mile 16 to mile 19 and a half, just going straight. Similar to Brooklyn, it's some rolling hills on 1st Avenue, slightly more sizable than the ones you'll get in Brooklyn, but nothing too crazy here, and great energy, which is definitely needed at this point in the course. right around mile 20, you'll head into the Bronx. You're not in the Bronx for long. I think you're in the Bronx for like a mile, mile and a half before crossing back into Manhattan on the Madison Avenue Bridge. So you're coming back in on the Madison Avenue Bridge and going into the Bronx on the Willis Avenue Bridge, I believe. Okay, and once you re-enter Manhattan, this is when the hard part comes. So you'll re-enter around the 34K mark, and you'll be going straight for the most part with a little turn right there at mile 22. And this is just gonna be tough because it's towards the end of the race, so it's always hard regardless. However, once you reach mile 23, that next mile will be the hardest mile of the race. It is an uphill, and it's also mile 23 of the race. So this is the segment here. So it's basically once you reach Central Park, once you reach the edge of Central Park, it's that mile that you'll have running down Fifth Avenue before you actually enter the park. And you can see here, that single mile has about 100 feet of elevation gain, which is a lot over the course of a mile. So focus for this, one foot in front of the other, just keep moving, keep going. It's going to be a slow mile, but that's okay. You will then enter at 90th Street into Central Park, and you'll have a nice stretch of rolling hills in Central Park. Good news is you're going downhill in Central Park, which if you've ever run in Central Park, going uphill, Cat Hill, is not fun. It is fun going downhill. So you can make up a little bit of time in Central Park if you've lost some time on that Fifth Avenue uphill, though given it's Central Park, you're gonna have some uphills there as well. But overall, it's a good stretch of Central Park. The most annoying part of the race though is you have to exit Central Park ever so briefly, go on to 59th Street, before you re-enter and finish. You'll finish at Tavern on the Green in Central Park. It is an uphill. However, you see all the different countries' flags and you see the finish line, so it distracts you from the uphill end. And as always, it is the best feeling crossing the finish line. So hopefully this was helpful, but please let me know if you have any questions about the marathon course, and I would be happy to answer, and follow along for more New York City Marathon.